The FBI is now infiltrating the offices of Republican congressmen. One staffer working for George Santos flipped into a federal informant, and now Republican George Santos has been indicted by the Biden DOJ. Very interesting timing, too. Right as the Oversight Committee was about to unleash the goods on Joe Biden, CNN got the leak, the sealed filing. They published this early, but now we have the indictment, which we will take a look at. But first on CNN, Santos charged by the DOJ in a federal probe. We remember who this individual is. He was the subject of a lot of news articles some time ago, and they just dragged out the old indictment when they needed a distraction, a red herring, and they filed it so nobody would talk about Biden. Federal prosecutors have filed criminal charges against Santos, the Republican lawmaker, with an astonishing pattern of lies. Santos was taken into federal custody on Wednesday. Is expected to appear at a federal court in New York Eastern District, facing 13 federal charges. We'll read the indictment. 7 counts of wire fraud, 3 counts of money laundering, 1 count theft of public funds, 2 counts making materially false statements to the House of Representatives. We'll go see, we'll look at it. We remember what Trump's indictment looked like, and that was 34 counts for a recurring felony that was a retainer agreement with a lawyer. The congressman's attorney declined to comment. Santos was en route back to New York on Tuesday night, skipping House votes, according to a source familiar with this. A spokeswoman for Santos would not respond to shouted questions either. Prior to her departure from office, CNN witnessed 3 staffers for Santos abruptly depart with their bags, not talking to the press when asked for comments. Now, the question is, how did the FBI get inside information about George Santos? Did they have a confidential human source in the congressman's office? Turns out, yes, they did. Derek Myers is an individual who is self-described as a journalist on Twitter. First Amendment, Freedom of Information Act nerd, tweets do not reflect my views, and so on. But he posted this. He said, look, I can publicly confirm that during my brief time in the congressman's office, I had met secretly with agents from the FBI in an effort to work as a confidential informant and a human asset against the congressman during my course of employment in his office. I cannot go into further detail at this time. So the FBI is not only invading attorneys' offices and prayer groups, as we discovered in the Proud Boys trial, but they're also having employees, staffers in congressional offices acting as assets, confidential informants, and human sources against Republican congressmen, confirmed by one of the staffers themselves. And big hat tip over on this one to Robert Barnes at vivabarneslaw.locals.com. You see here, he said this: FBI informants are now infiltrating Congress, and they're bragging about it. They're publicly just saying, well, you know, letting you know this is what we're doing now. So the FBI is going after individuals for January 6th, who I don't think should be prosecuted or charged at all because they committed no more serious conduct than any of the other Antifa individuals or BLM individuals who also didn't get prosecuted or rained scorn upon them from the establishment in this country. But now they're also going into congressional offices to indict Republicans. You see, this is the indictment against George Santos, submitted in the Eastern District of New York, United States of America versus George Santos. The indictment begins as follows. They tell us Santos was a resident of Queens, and during the 2020 and 2022 election cycles, Santos campaigned for a candidate and won. He was sworn into office January 7, 2023. But one of his organizations is an LLC organization, principal place of business somewhere else. Another company has another business, and another person whose identity is known to the grand jury was a political consultant operating in Queens. Around September 2022 and October, George Santos caused person 1 to act on behalf of company 1. Investment firm 1, the identity also known to the Department of Justice, was employed by investment firm 1. The defendant was employed by the investment firm as regional director, and Santos received a salary of $120K. He deposited that salary into his bank account. But in September and October, Santos executed and devised a scheme to defraud his supporters and obtain money fraudulently by inducing supporters to contribute funds to company number 1 under the false pretense that the money would be used to support his candidacy, and then actually spending thousands of dollars on personal expenses, especially luxury designer clothing and credit card payments. Didn't AOC do something very similar to this? She never paid for that dress at first that said tax the rich. I wonder if she's being investigated and infiltrated by the FBI. No, they didn't look into anything like that. She said that she was paying her bills. That might be theft. So these are just campaign crimes? Let's continue. Santos communicated and directed directed person one to communicate to those supporters false information, including that it was a 501c4, would be used as independent expenditures, but they didn't. Santos converted the funds into his own personal benefit, just like AOC converted a dress for her own benefit without paying her people at first. She may have rectified that bill now, I don't know. Applicable campaign finance laws, they say you have to disclose the amount and sources to political parties, and independent expenditure is defined by the law, and George Santos knew that it wasn't registered appropriately. So then he knew that the company was not registered with the IRS as an appropriate 501c4, and as part of the scheme, he solicited contributions from Company 1 via emails and other documents, and he didn't tell them about the purpose of the contributions. These are campaign finance crimes. At the direction of Santos, another company made additional expenditures benefiting Santos. It was part of his scheme to defraud contributors, making false representations. They have a bunch of emails and text messages, person 1, company 1, all sending stuff back and forth. He advised it was a small C4, and apparently there was an email talking about raising $700,000 to a goal of $1.5 million to be raised, and they don't like how it's being categorized. The email falsely stated that the company was exclusively built to aid, but it wasn't. People were relying upon their messaging and making donations, but no, some of the money was used for personal benefit, including cash withdrawals, luxury designer clothing, credit card payments, car payments, personal debts, and other bank transfers. So then there was a fraudulent receipt of unemployment benefits, application and receipt. Coronavirus pandemic hit. Santos in June 17, 2020. So before he's in office, okay, wanted unemployment insurance when the pandemic was going on, falsely claimed to have been unemployed previously. Santos was a regional director at the time, was not unemployed, was getting $120,000. That money was deposited into the banks. He was asked about disclosures. He's got a duty to file legal disclosures. He didn't file legal disclosures, required to do it online in a system, didn't do that. He falsely certified that his only income was $55,000, but he received more. He received more than $25,000. And then he falsely certified that his earned income was $750,000, and so he didn't report it appropriately. So contrary to these attestations, he received $28,000 from a firm and $20,000 in unemployment insurance benefits that he didn't report truthfully. Wow. So illegal paperwork. The allegations contained here say George Santos is responsible for all of this. Here, let's take a look at the actual claims. Or here's what we have here. Count 1. This is a felony, it sounds like. This is a crime. Let's see how they're categorized. Count 1 through 5, false pretense crimes. Count 1, there was an email that was illegal. Count 2, October 12th, another email stating funds would be going around. Count 3 is another email falsely stating that funds from a contributor would be used to purchase television advertisements. That wasn't true. Here's another statement about being a social welfare organization. That's not true. Here's another email stating that funds received would be used for candidacy. Okay, every email's a felony. Count 1, email, felony. Count 2, email on the 12th, felony. Count 3, email on the 20th, felony. Count 4, text message from Santos. So in other words, this guy could have been mistaken about this, right? He could have, I don't really know. I think this is all how this works. I don't know what the categorization, I think it's a C4 or whatever. He sends a couple emails until he gets corrected, and felony, 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 felony. Count 5, felony, another text message. He's sending messages. Every time he sends a message, he gets popped. Count 6 through 8, which means they're stacking the charges, okay? This, like, they wouldn't treat a Democrat this way. Here, on or about October 21st, both dates being approximate, George Santos also did the following. On October 21st, he transferred $25,000 fraudulently obtained from a contributor from Company 1 to his bank account. Another $25,000 5 days later from a company to DeSantos' bank account. And then $24,000 from DeSantis' bank account back over to DeSantis, I'm sorry, not to DeVolder, to DeVolder Santos bank account, to DeVolder Santos bank account. So those are the felonies. Count 9, saying that he embezzled an amount exceeding $1,000. Counts 10 and 11, saying he transmitted money around. Let's see how much money. Wow, look at this. Interstate wire fraud, $564 from one bank account to another. On January 26th, another $564. Wow. Count 12, fictitious fraudulent statements about bonuses that he's earned, failing to report income, failing to report and disclose. And another count 13, you see the pattern just continues on. False statements about about the money. So they want forfeiture. They want all that money to go back over to the government, forfeit the property described, indictment coming across, a true bill by the foreperson of the grand jury, indicted on a very convenient day when everybody's going to talk about George Santos instead of the Biden crime family and their millions of dollars that they got fraudulently, that they didn't report appropriately, that they didn't disclose to anybody. The DOJ just timed it, dropped it perfectly. And this entire time, all of this evidence was being gobbled up, presumably, by an FBI mole, an FBI informant, somebody who was there digging through the records and just handing them over to the FBI so the FBI could go prosecute Republicans at a very convenient time. And I'm not endorsing George Santos's actions. I don't think anybody should be committing crimes, especially if you are a U.S. congressperson. Your books should be very tight, all of them. But they're not all of them. We know that AOC and others have had a long history of not paying their bills and misreporting things. But the DOJ doesn't go after them. They only go after individuals that are useful to the narrative and useful to this bureaucracy who's currently governing. Now, there was another clip that came in. Kevin McCarthy was asked about George Santos.
Now, are you going to continue to stand by George Santos now that he's been indicted on federal charges? And will you stand by President Trump after a jury found him liable on sexual abuse?
I'm not going to avoid your question, but as you know, I've been at the White House. I haven't seen the indictment, but as you know, with George Santos, I did not put him on any committees. For those like Senator Menendez, who was indicted and we went to trial, he was still able to vote, and others. I believe he's the chairman of a committee today. In America, we'll just follow the same pattern we always have, right? If a person is indicted, they're not on committees, they have the right to vote, but they have to go to trial. If, just like we had a member of Fortenberry, he had the same ability. I removed him from committees, but he was found guilty, and I told him he needed to resign. That is my policies and principles on this, and I'd follow the same path.
And Trump being found.
So going to follow the process. We'll see what George Santos does. Obviously, he's going to hire a defense attorney and start to defend himself. But the Biden DOJ, as unhinged as ever, they pull this card right out of their back pocket. Joe Biden and Hunter Biden are in the crosshairs under political scrutiny. They say, hey, look over here. We've got a Republican that we are now prosecuting. In the media, like good little lapdogs, they just follow the leash of the Biden administration and they bark very loudly when they're told to speak.